Hi, everybody. Welcome. Welcome. Look at you all. Give yourselves a hand. My name's Erik Barnum, and I have the good fortune to be the sales floor manager and a bookseller at the best damn bookstore on the planet, Northshire Bookstore. Give us some love. Give us some love. Northshire Bookstore is very pleased to be partnering with WAMC, Northeast Public Radio, and Joe Donahue to start this radio series. We're very excited about it. It's going to be heard by thousands of people, and we are kicking it off with just the best guest tonight, aren't we? Now, I want to see Rachel as much as you do, so I'm going to be brief. I'll get out of your way, but first I got to have some housekeeping stuff. This is my cell phone. Everybody has one. Everybody turn them off. Okay? Unless, of course, your ringtone is the theme song to the Rachel Maddow show. You have to turn your things off, okay? Well, let me tell you about Joe Donahue. Joe Donahue has been on the airwaves for about 25 years, yes? Hosted the book show. Also hosts the Eclectic Roundtable. He's interviewed everybody from Norman Mailer to Steve Martin, from Maya Angelou to, well, Bill O'Reilly. And now he's going to have a great big feather in his cap. I first fell in thrall with Rachel Maddow when she was on Air America Radio. In 2008, she was chosen to be an MSNBC political analyst. The same year, the Rachel Maddow show started on MSNBC, the most successful launch in the station's history. LA Times called it, in 2008, the best in television. The Washington Post went one better in 2009 and said it's the best of the decade. She's been nominated by the National Critics Association, Television Critics Association, for outstanding achievement in news and information. And the Interfaith Alliance awarded her the Walter Cronkite Faith and Freedom Award in 2010. I have to tell you how hard it was to memorize all that. She got her BA in public policy at Stanford University, and of course, went on a Rhodes Scholarship to Oxford University. You're a classic underachiever, right? She's also a great bartender, by the way. And now she's written a book. It's called Drift, The Unmooring of American Military Policy. Joe's described it. It basically says that Americans have lost sight of their ideals, that the intelligence community has taken over our war-making powers, and we've become disconnected. It's a great book. It's a really great book. It's a really great and important book that important people should read. But I'll let you tell her about it. I'll let her tell you about it. I've taken up enough of your time. Please give a great Green Mountain welcome to Rachel Maddow.
Oh, hello. There's a lot of you here. I can see all of you. It's terrifying.
For 90% of the people in this crowd, you are our patron saint. I was listening to you on Howard Stern the other day. No, it's okay. You can admit it. It's fine. And he was commenting about how David Letterman was flirting with you on the air. And you had one of the best comments that I've ever heard, which was, isn't having people on our collective radio and TV shows always a form of flirting?
It has implied flattery in it. You deserve to be here on my thing.
To have you on my thing is a wonderful achievement in my broadcasting career, and I can't thank you enough for that.
And that had better entendre than anything that happened on Howard. That was astonishing. Actually, that was just illegal to say in Vermont.
The name of the book, as Erik mentioned, is Drift. We have a copy here, and I love because you have self-described how vague that title is. It's a very vague title.
Yeah.
On purpose.
I think the publisher was worried that people were going to think it was just a very bad novel. I was insisting. I've never written a book before. I don't think I'll ever write a book again, but I was convinced that not having a subtitle, having no explanation whatsoever, would be the way to sell this book. And I think that the people who know more about books rightfully talked me into putting the subtitle on it to give it a little bit of explanatory heft. But the idea behind calling it Drift was that I did not want anybody to lose sight of these things that I'm documenting in the book, this change I think we've gone through. I don't want you to think it was a conspiracy, because I don't think it was a conspiracy. I don't think it was a deliberate thing that somebody set out to change the country in the way that I say I'm so worried about in the book. I don't think it was on purpose. I think it just sort of happened. We drifted into it.
The other thing that you make the point is that, I think you're 5 years younger than I am, but we lived through this pretty much. We saw this. And you start from LBJ, really, and bring us to our current day. This is not something that has been lurking in the shadows for centuries. This is really something that we've seen over the past few decades.
Yeah, and I got the idea to write the book, or I felt like I needed to write the book, in the post 9/11 era. I started feeling like there was something going on that I wanted to try to explain 4 or 5 years ago when I first started thinking about this. And what I realized I was frustrated about was that so many people who were on the left and on the right, and people who don't have politics at all, so many people who were upset about what happened in national security policy after 9/11 think that it was a post 9/11 problem. And we definitely made some decisions that I think are spurious after 9/11, but I think the roots of us feeling like national security policy makes itself, and that the military goes and fights our wars instead of the country going to war, I think the roots of those things actually were they predated 9/11. We had changed enough in the era after Vietnam that by the time 9/11 happened, we didn't feel like we had very much choice about whether we were going to go to war. We were going to go to war if the president wanted to, and that was essentially it. And so there isn't actually very much in the book about George W. Bush. There is stuff in the book about Dick Cheney, but less about him as vice president and more about his time in Congress and his time as Secretary of Defense.
Because if there is a looming character from the 70s to today, it is Dick Cheney.
I really want to interview him.
The book is dedicated to him.
The book is dedicated to Dick Cheney in the hopes that that will make him want to talk to me. I don't think it will.
Good luck with that.
Dick Cheney, what can I offer you? This book, I give you this book. It is for you, sir.
A week ago, maybe a heart.
Yeah. But then I wouldn't be here to talk to him. You know, the New York Daily News did a little tiny, I think it was in their gossip column, about the fact that I had dedicated the book to Dick Cheney. And I've always said he's my white whale. He is the one person who I want to interview. I will take any member of the Cheney family. It doesn't even have to be him. And they wrote a gossip column squib about it. And the last line of the little paragraph they wrote was, "We hope he will have a change of heart." I could not.
Wow.
Oh, please tell me you meant that. That was on purpose. That was astonishing. Yeah, but he has a starring role in this. I think when the Iran-Contra scandal happened, which we've kind of forgotten about, we remember Reagan as a saint now. But at the time of the Reagan presidency, and especially in the second term of the Reagan presidency, he not only was not thought of as a saint, but Iran-Contra really loomed largest in many ways over his legacy. And you know, the deficit and the way that he dealt with the Cold War and Grenada and some other things I write about, but Iran-Contra was a huge deal. And the defense that the Reagan administration cooked up to kind of save Reagan's butt from the Iran-Contra scandal fallout was that they said, we realize that the president decided to break the law, to overtly and on purpose evade something that Congress passed a law saying he could not do. Selling arms to Iran, using the proceeds to fund the Contras. Congress knew he wanted to do it, told him he couldn't, and he went and did it anyway. But we've decided after the fact that he shouldn't get in trouble for it because, what could we come up with? Because we believe that if the president wants to do something about national security, he can do it, and there's nothing that can constrain him. It was an ad hoc, radical, after-the-fact, cooked-up defense to try to save Reagan. I don't think they thought of it in advance. I think they came up with it as a defense when they needed to. And when Reagan got in trouble and Congress investigated Iran-Contra, there was this backbench Wyoming Republican congressman who filed a minority dissenting view to what Congress found. And he said, actually, I kind of agree with the Reagan administration. There was no crime here. A president can do anything he or she wants when it comes to national security. Nothing constrains a president as long as he says he's acting in the nation's national security interest. And that was a cockamamie, crazy, marginal thing from some backbench, unimportant Wyoming Republican congressman until he became White House Chief of Staff and Secretary of Defense and then the most powerful vice president in history. So I want to ask him about that.
We want you to ask him about that. And the other thing, while he is there saying, yes, this is a good thing, you note in the book that during Iran-Contra, a Georgia congressman by the name of Newt Gingrich was saying, this is bad.
This Reagan guy, didn't understand what he was like. Yeah. I love Newt Gingrich. I love everything about Newt Gingrich. But Newt Gingrich, one of the things one of the things that's been awesome for Newt Gingrich about his 2012 in politics is that he's been selling a lot of DVDs. So he may not be collecting any delegates toward the nominating convention, but he and Callista have been selling books and DVDs, and we love people who sell books. It's great. But one of his vote for me, also buy my DVD offers is his Reagan hagiography. And how he's trying to say not only was Reagan a saint, but I, Newt Gingrich, facilitated the sainthood of Ronald Reagan. He couldn't have done it without me, essentially. And in Iran-Contra, you look at what he was saying. He was totally throwing Reagan under the bus, which is probably what Reagan deserved to be, given what he did. But Newt Gingrich was not exactly his wingman at the time.
I just want to read what you write in the book, because the book is beautifully written.
Oh, thank you.
It's really beautifully written, as is your commentary on the air as well. But here's the end of the chapter, Stupid Regulations. When Ronald Reagan extricated himself from the Iran-Contra scandal by cutting one of those crucial mooring lines without considered forethought or a specific course headings in mind, it set the country adrift and heading into a dangerous tide. So even though we had all this stuff, we had Vietnam, we had a bit of a self-correction, right? Where we tried to figure out what the hell we did and to make sure that that never happened again, and then we went right back into it again.
Yeah, and that process, that arc, which has happened essentially sort of over the course of my lifetime. I was born right at the end of the Vietnam War in 1973. That we had a national correction after Vietnam because of everything we know about Vietnam and because of the way that we felt we had gone wrong as a country there. And so there was all sorts of interesting changes made. Congress asserted its constitutional prerogative that they're supposed to be the ones who make decisions about war with the War Powers Act. Not only that piece of legislation, but also just their newfound ownership of war and peace was manifest in all sorts of interesting ways. Gerald Ford tried to make us go back to Vietnam. And Congress, Democrats and Republicans in Congress, used appropriations to say, no, you cannot do it. We are Congress, and we are not allowing you to do it. The president wanted to go back into Vietnam. He kept saying, I don't want it to be a massive thing anymore, but we do need to put a few more troops. And Congress said no. They confronted him in a way that horrified him as the president, but which was sort of the way that Congress was supposed to use its power over those sorts of things. We also had one really interesting thing that happened within the military, which is that a general named Creighton Abrams, who Nixon really hated. Creighton Abrams was Secretary of the Army at the end of the Vietnam War. He oversaw the demobilization at the end of Vietnam, and he instituted something called the Total Force Doctrine, which everybody calls the Abrams Doctrine. And it said, if you want to have a big war, you have to use the Guard and Reserves. We're going to put operational functionality in the Guard and Reserves so that you can't just have the regular Army go and leave the Guard and Reserves at home, the way we did in Vietnam. The Guard and Reserves mostly were not called up for Vietnam, right? There was a draft, but the Guard and Reserves were left. And the reason that LBJ wanted to use the draft instead of the Guard and Reserves is because he felt like the children, the sons of a lot of influential people had gotten themselves into the Guard and Reserves in order to avoid going, so you didn't want to upset those influential people. You didn't want to get calls from well-connected constituents. Instead, you'd use the draft and hope that nobody noticed. People noticed. But they got rid of the draft. They reorganized the Guard and Reserve so that they would be absolutely integral to the way that we had to fight wars. And the idea that Abrams had was that he was worried about the damage that had been done to the military. He loved the Army. But he also did not want the country to ever be able to have a big war again without dislocating American civilian lives at the same time, so that we would feel like a country that went to war. And that was had very far-reaching consequences. The U.S. military is the largest organization in the world. So even small policy changes can have a really, really big effect on our big country and on millions of people within it. So there were these changes that were made, all of which were to sort of kind of set us up to the way we used to be, the way that I think the Constitution intended us to be around war and peace. And then over the course of sort of Reagan presidency and thereafter, we chipped away at all of those things. And that's, I think, how we got where we are now.
In fact, in the book, you have a to-do list of things that we, at the end of the book, of what we can actually do to try to get out of this. And one of the things that you call for is that our Guard and Reserves need to be the Guard and Reserves again, because these are men and women, as you write, who are now. This is 24/7 for year after year after year, and it was never intended to be that way.
Right. It's the relationship of the Guard and Reserves as a bridge between civilian life and military life is an important and delicate thing in our country. And since 9/11, we've been waging the longest war in American history, and simultaneously another 8.5-year-long war in Iraq, plus all of the other military engagements that we know less about and that are less debated. And so we've had less than 1% of the country waging these massive and massively long wars in our name, and they're dealing with 3, 4, 5 more combat deployments. Military families' lives since 9/11 have been really, really, really different than the average American civilian family's lives. And one of the things that happened in the post-9/11 era is that the Guard and Reserves started getting called up so often that a lot of us in civilian life can't even tell the difference between Guardsmen and Reservists and active duty military, because it's become almost the same type of life. And it's not supposed to be that. It's not supposed to be that the Guard and Reserves never get called up, and it's not supposed to be that they are constantly called up. If you are in the Guard and Reserves, you are supposed to have a mostly civilian life, and you are called up when your country needs you, and then you go back to civilian life. And you stay trained, and you stay equipped, and you get the benefits that go along with that, but you are supposed to be rooted in civilian life, and so therefore we civilians are supposed to notice when you're not there. It has political consequences as well as strategic consequences. And I feel like this is one of the things I think it's hard to, for some reason it doesn't have very much political resonance. But every time I talk about it in public, I get a lot of this. Because we all know Guardsmen and Reservists in our families, in our communities, in our friends, and we know that that life is maybe not what was promised.
You talk in the book a lot about, and one of the things that you attribute to how we got where we are is simply secrecy. And what comes through in the book, loud and clear, from LBJ to today, and this is what frightens me, is that it seems as though a president can do whatever the hell they want to do.
And I am not a pacifist. I am not a person who is against all war all the time. And I have respect for people who have a pacifist philosophy or belief system. but that's not where I come from. And actually, the book isn't about the merits of any particular war.
Right.
I do have sympathy for the idea that the president ought to have some amount of individual authority to defend the country. I mean, the way that the founders talked about it was to do things like repel invasion, right? So there ought to be some way to act in a nimble way, using force when need be. But it ought to be a limited thing. Secrecy is, I'm sure, tempting for people who have power, because it's a way of avoiding accountability. If nobody knows you're doing it, you can't be asked about it, so you don't have to explain it. And also, if it goes poorly, it's a way of avoiding accountability. And if you give people the power to declare anything secret that they need to declare secret, yeah, some of it will be some secret with good operational reasons and thinking behind it, and some of it will be wimping out. Some of it will be political cowardice.
So whether it's Reagan in Grenada, or Bush 1 in Iraq, or Clinton in Bosnia, or the situation that we're in now, what is the motivation? What is the motivation for the president to say, because you outlined in here, and by the way, this book is beautifully, I mean, not only do you write beautifully, but you edit. You take pieces of testimony and articles and verbatim and put them in, and just, which I assume was a real pain in the ass, actually. Yes. I would think that would be.
Yeah, like, see this?
Yeah. But it so adds to the point. But you time and time again throughout the book, you hear a voice of reason, and it can come from the strangest place, of whether it's William F. Buckley or John Wayne.
Seriously,
John Wayne, who had a great quote. And people, of course, of the administration who come in and say, can't we diplomatically try to figure out how to avoid going to war? So what is the getting the backup to say, to just dismiss that, to shut the door, to allow it to be said, but then not pay any attention to it?
You know, I think that looking at the evidence that I lay out in the book, I think different people are going to come to different conclusions about it. Personally, what I feel like is that people make decisions based on what they want to get done in the short run. It is almost always, I think, here motivated by what they think is right for the country. But there's some hassle involved. There's something annoying stopping them from doing something that they think is good for the country. And so, for example, Ronald Reagan. Ronald Reagan's policies in Central America and South America are things that I absolutely disagree with. And if you were Ronald Reagan's constituent when he was president, you also disagreed with him on that. He could not convince the country to do what he wanted to do in Central America, even when he had sky-high approval ratings. Even when he was able to convince the country of lots of other things, including lots of other controversial national security things, he could not get people to think his way about Nicaragua. And still, he was absolutely convinced of what he needed to do in Nicaragua. So, one barrier that he had was Congress passing a law saying, we know what you want to do in Nicaragua, that would be illegal. So he came up with a way around that, which was to act illegally and in secret and come up with doing all the stuff that ended up causing the Iran-Contra scandal when it came out. Then there was the problem of not persuading the public. Well, secrecy helps there too. Secrecy not only helps you not get caught, it lets you not explain yourself. It saves you the trouble of winning the argument. Secrecy is, I think, secrecy is one of those things that's very hard to root out in the national security field, even more than the other places the government likes to use it, just because they can always say, well, we can't let you know because then the bad guys will know, right? So it's hard, but that's the way they do it. The other barriers that presidents have to doing things they want to do are other forms of political constraint that stop them from using the U.S. military even when they want to use force. They say let's say you want to train the Croatians. Let's say you want to arm the Croatians. Let's say our involvement with NATO and what Congress thinks about it means that we can't use U.S. military to do that. Well, Bill Clinton found a company called MPRI, which would do it for profit. Great. How about if people maybe they're interested in pursuing your national security aim, but frankly, we can't afford it. Well, tell people it's free. Tell people it's free, give them a tax cut, and let our grandkids pay for it. These are all ways that we have come up with to make presidents able to pursue national security aims without the things that were supposed to constrain them from doing it in a way that would hurt the country, or that would divorce what our military did from our control over it as citizens who get to participate in a democratic government. It was all about just accommodating whatever the latest local hassle was. And the little voices of reason that you can hear throughout the book, I think, are mostly people who are thinking with foresight, or at least thinking, there's probably a reason we're not supposed to be able to do this. If it's so stupid for Congress, a committee of 500-something people, to be deciding on war and peace, if that's such a stupid thing to do for national security, then why did the founders do it that way? Why did they make it a core American value that the powers of war and peace would be vested with studied care in the legislature and not in the executive? They did that on purpose. Should we think about what that's for before we throw it away? Shut up, I need to get to Nicaragua. So I think it's long-sightedness versus short-sightedness. I don't think either one of those is a word. But I do think that we can get back to the way it was supposed to be, because I don't think it's been that long since we've been off course.
So let's talk about how we do that, and then we'll talk about some other stuff. But in getting back to that, of course, there are the people who say, you can't put the genie back in the bottle, you can't put the toothpaste back in the tube. You use that word divorce, and you say we can undivorce ourselves from what we have done. And I assume in some ways we go back to that post-Vietnam era.
I think one of the sort of ambient questions we have to figure out. I was on The Daily Show the other day with Jon Stewart, and he asked this question. He said, so many of the things that you're for, so many of the things that you cheerlead for in the book are things that happened after Vietnam, but does that mean we need something as shocking to the country again as Vietnam was in order to get us back in that direction? And I think it is an open question whether or not the last 10 years of warfare since 9/11 are as shocking to the country, are as dislocating to us, are as upsetting as what we went through in Vietnam. Obviously, they're not the same kind of things. But I do feel like there is broad, bipartisan discomfort with who we are in terms of the relationship between us and these wars. 8.5 years of war just ended in Iraq in December. Remember? Remember the ticker tape parades and the celebration and the 3-inch headlines and welcome home? I mean, Tucson is holding a welcome home and thank you to the vets parade today. St. Louis did it in January. New York's not going to do it. We've still got the longest war in American history going on in Afghanistan. So that, I think there is broad bipartisan, nonpartisan discomfort with that, which might be enough to start to make some of these reforms. Because the things on my little wish list at the end are not impossible things. I mean, some of them are big, but honestly, like the contractors thing, the reason that contractors are important is, in part because contractors sometimes do bad things. But structurally, contractors shield from us how much it costs for us to pay for their services. They shield for us who's in charge, what are the lines of accountability when they do things that are wrong. And they shield us from the cost of our military actions. If the numbers of people who are deployed in our name are bolstered with people who work for private companies, we don't necessarily know when everybody who's deployed in our name is hurt or killed. And the insulation from what we're doing that's given to us by contracting, I think that, combined with the fact that it actually costs us more money than if we were just having the military peel its own potatoes like it used to, means that maybe we could find a little bipartisan consensus around rolling back contracting. It's amazing. We didn't do this for very long. The military used to drive its own convoys. Generals used to be guarded by other members of the United States military. Our embassies used to all be guarded by U.S. Marines. There used to be something called KP, in which you were in the military and you literally peeled potatoes for other people in the military to eat later. It was not that weird an idea. We did fine without this massive outsourced, privatized contracting of military-related logistics that we've got right now. It hasn't been around for that long. And we talk about it now in our politics as if it's irreversible. It's not irreversible. It's not. And the military, as the largest institution in the world, you make it largest organization in the world, you make a small policy change, it can have a very big effect. So we could roll back contracting. We could stop treating the CIA as if it is a branch of the military, which is what we've started doing in the last 10 years. The CIA, as a spy agency, has always had some form of operational component. That's where most of its controversies come from. But it's always been a pretty small part of what they do. Now they are, in effect, a branch of the military, and one that our elected officials don't answer for. When you ask them about something the CIA does, they won't confirm that it happened. We're not supposed to have a secret military. That could stop. We could stop with the contracting, we could stop with the secret military, we could treat the Garden Reserves like Garden Reserves again, and we could hope for a Congress that'll get up on its hind legs and assert its constitutional prerogative to be in control of war, rather than asserting that with a president. So I don't think any of those things are impossible. On the executive power thing, no matter what you think about the current president, whether you are a fan or not, I don't think any president, unless we're going to, reincarnate Jesus, I don't think any president could be counted on to give away power that is accrued to the executive. I think a president who gets inherited even radically extra constitutional power is not going to give away that power willingly. Once they've got it, they feel like they're in office, they know what the country's best interests are, and they're going to use that power for the country's best interests. Nobody gives away power. Power has to be taken by somebody else, and in this case, it needs to be taken by Congress.
The name of the book is Drift, the Unmooring of American Military Power, and it is out from Crown. This is what I find fascinating about your story, because I've been in radio for 27 years, something like that.
Really?
Yeah.
Since you were 4.
Well, a long time, a long time. And so you go to Stanford, and then you go to Oxford, and then you work in local radio.
Isn't that how everybody does it?
I have never met anyone in local radio. I mean, it's hard to find someone who speaks and stands up straight, and I'm with guys that have cold cans of Chef Boyardee and just eating them out with a spoon.
I love that, actually.
Yes, well, so at what point did you say, okay, while you were working on your dissertation,
yeah,
and you started going on the radio?
Are you familiar with the concept of odd jobs?
Yes, yes.
That's what I was doing.
Well, and obviously, many people, to support a career in radio, do odd jobs, but for you, that was one of the odd jobs.
Radio was an odd job.
Yeah.
Yeah, I went to England, I went to grad school in England, and then I ran out of money and scholarship before I was done with my dissertation, because I had a really good time living in England. And I was absolutely, totally flat dead broke with tens of thousands of dollars of student loan debt. And I really wanted to finish my dissertation, because I'd never wanted to be in academia, so I couldn't try to get a teaching job and be ABD, be the person who did everything except the dissertation. I really wanted to finish it so I could justify all that time I spent screwing around in London. And so my plan was, I need to be miserable, so I need to live in a place that's very uncomfortable, and where I have no friends, so I can see the only way out of where I am is finishing this damn thing. So I had two options for living a very unhappy life. My father's best friend from the Air Force is a Republican lawyer in Orange County, California.
Yeah, okay.
That would work.
Yeah, that'd do it.
He offered me a former broom closet, a windowless office in his law firm basement or something, and I was like, that would work. But then I had friends who I'd known from growing up in the San Francisco Bay Area who had moved to Western Massachusetts because they heard it was Lesbianville, USA. Woo! Which it is. And they opened a B&B, which is a bad idea. I don't know. I don't want to actually. You can't ask in Vermont. Anybody here know somebody who runs a B&B? Don't put your hand up. But it's a very difficult form of work. It sounds charming. It's not charming. It's 24 hours of work, constant slavery. So they ran a B&B for a few years, decided that this was a bad form of work, decided to go back to full-time employment outside the home, but they wanted to keep their place, this beautiful place they had bought to run the inn. And so while they were going back to work full-time, they said, well, we need somebody to take care of the dogs and do sort of like handyman stuff and like go to the dump and, you know, burn the brush and stuff. And I said, if I don't have to pay rent, I will stay with you and do all of that stuff. For what? It'll take me like 8 weeks. But I figured I'd be miserable because it was in New England, where I didn't want to live. It was in the country, where I didn't want to live. And there were dogs, which I didn't particularly like. And I thought I'd be bad at everything they assigned me to do. So I figured it would be awful. Perfect. And now here it is 13 years later, and I live in New England, in the country, with a dog, and I love it here. So I had way more fun than I intended to, and I ended up overstaying my welcome and having to pay money, you know, get money to eat. And so I worked drove deliveries until my car broke down, and I did handyman stuff until I installed the plumbing fixture on the end of a faucet backwards and exploded the faucet. I worked at Indigo Coffee Roasters in Northampton, Massachusetts, and I was doing all of their unskilled labor, including stamping the word decaf on like hundreds of coffee bags, hundreds of them upside down, every one. I'm just bad at everything. To the point where my last job, I got demoted from everything at Indigo to the point where my job was bucket washing. And that's what I was doing. I was unloading trucks, so unloading bags of raw coffee beans off of trucks and washing buckets. And my friends who I was living with said, you know, we listen while you're sleeping in the morning, not finishing your dissertation, hint, hint. We have been listening to this very funny morning zoo radio show called Dave in the Morning. And the news girl is leaving, so they're doing open auditions. Why don't you do that? And they dared me, and I went to the open audition, and I got hired on the spot, and I started the next day.
At what point do you think on the radio you found your voice of what it is that you wanted to say? Because starting in commercial radio, certainly, and also small market radio, gives you, at least it did for me, you have incredible opportunities, but there's also, you know, a lot of crap that goes along with that as well, but you get to do everything.
Yeah.
So at what point did you say, okay, this is where I'm comfortable thinking and talking and reacting?
That's a very good question. I liked being on the radio immediately, which I think is a form of egotism.
Yes.
You know, you put on microphone, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, we could probably talk about this privately. Yeah. But you know, you put on headphones and you hear your own voice come back to you, and that either turns your stomach or you want to do it more. And jerks like us want to do that more. So it's so that happened. There was a sort of instant click for me that, oh, this is fun. And it was being in morning zoo radio. It was all jokes. It was great. Like, I read AP copy in terms of the news, and then Dave and I joked about it. And on Fridays, we wrote jingles. You know, it was great. And I'm a bad singer, so that hurt bad. But, you know, I spent exactly 1 year, 365 days on the radio after getting that gig. And then I had to go back to England to finish my dissertation. And, you know, I have to do like an oral exam to defend your doctorate. And I did that, and that was just a couple of weeks, I think, maybe even less. A couple of weeks? Yeah, end of August of 2001. And so as soon as I came back, figuring out what I'm going to do in my life, 9/11 happened. And when 9/11 happened, I mean, you probably remember, even all the local commercial radio around the country, including here, it wasn't, everybody broke format, you know, like, right. People stopped voice tracking and started putting real people on the radio, and there were call-ins, and we were all turning up at the VA Medical Center to donate blood, and there were drives of all different kinds, and there was community meetings, and there was vigils, and you know, it was a emotional time, and radio was part of that. Radio became more local than it had been, and I realized that I wanted to feel helpful, and one of the ways that I wanted to feel helpful was that I wanted to help out in being informational on the radio. And so I called WRSI, the river in Northampton, and just said, hey, I used to be on the WRNX morning show, could I pick up spare shifts? Like, is there anybody who needs fill-ins? Like, I'd be happy to do weekends or weird times. I know you're staying live overnight. I'll take late night shifts. I'd like to just help out. And that's, I think, where I realized that the radio was more than just an odd job, that it was something that I wanted to, it was a way to connect with people. And that eventually turned into me hosting the morning show on the river. And then when Air America was founded, I forced them to hire me. I did. I crammed my foot in the door, and they were trying to shut it, and I didn't. Yeah.
And you were on the air with Air America, and then you got the gig with MSNBC, and did both for a little while, and then Air America went off the air. Can a liberal network survive? Can something like that happen? Were there problems inherent within Air America, or is an audience issue?
It's a good question. I don't know. And it'll be interesting to see if anybody ever tries to start a liberal radio network again. I mean, certainly there are individual liberal radio hosts who have done very well. And a lot of them have crossover on TV, people like Ed Schultz and Stephanie Miller and Bill Press and Tom Hartman and guys like that. So there's definitely people who have figured out a way to reach a large audience and stay on the air. Maybe the problem was that we were trying to launch a network, which is by definition a large overhead thing that you're asking people to make a big commitment to. You're trying to turn over a whole radio station to an untested format with unproven hosts who, you have to train every liberal in America that there's an AM part of the radio. Before Air America, like occasionally there's somebody here and there, but it's sports, religion, and people telling you that the president's a Muslim. I mean, that's sort of it. So it's trying to take over a medium that had no liberals in it was a big reach. And so maybe that was the right way to do it, sort of go big and try to do it that way, but it didn't work as a network. I am still super grateful to Air America. There's no way I would be here today without the experiment that was Air America. They hired me because I forced them to. I mean, I was an unrated morning show host in a tertiary, unranked Western New England market, playing 9-minute Miles Davis songs and running up to stand on the median in the middle of Main Street in Northampton and give away tickets, and then running back downstairs before the song was over to play the local furniture store ad. I mean, it was really, and they're like, yeah, okay, now move to New York. So it's crazy that they hired me, but they hired me, they gave me a chance, I ended up with my own show. That's the only reason that I ended up on TV. And I told Air America from the beginning, because we were on the rocks before we were out of the cove, that I would be the last one, that I would stick it out, that no matter what happened, as long as they would have me, I would stay there. And it's true, I told them, I'll be the last plane off the island, and I was the last plane off the island, and stuff was on fire by the time I was taking off. But I'm very grateful for it, and I hope, I am really happy about the success of liberals who have stayed in the radio market, and I hope that will expand. But it's a tough medium.
Because it would seem to me in some cases, if you were to be on the radio, you can even get a larger audience than you have on television. Now, while you do not win in the ratings to, say, Fox.
Beats everybody, yeah.
Well, Fox beats everybody in TV news, but ultimately, Cartoon Network still beats Fox, right?
Yeah. Everybody watching cable news all at once, if you combined everybody over the course of 24 hours, Deadliest Catch beats us. Easy. So, we get all excited about, oh, I got 3% more than you in the demo on a Tuesday. Yeah, you know what? Talk to SpongeBob. Because, we are, we're not that big a deal. Yeah.
Right.
So, and radio has a big audience. It's true.
Yeah. So you could do that if...
I could do that if I, had a second Rachel who I sent off to do that. I'm a very slow worker.
Now you like television and you're used to it.
I can only do one thing. I can't do the book and the TV show. I can't do this again. This aged me a decade trying to do this. And for a while I was doing radio and TV, but both suffered. There are some people who are verbally prolific, and it takes me too long. It takes me 12 hours. I have a 12-hour day every day just for doing the TV show. And so and that's fine if you do a 12-hour day every once in a while, but that means I'm doing 12 hours a day, 5 days a week, 51 weeks a year. Now for going, in my 4th year of doing this, and to add something to that on a daily basis. I mean, I could do it, but it would be stupid, and I'm not interested in doing anything stupid, I guess.
We want to wrap up, and obviously a lot of folks here want to meet you and get their book signed. We have a couple of audience questions that came in online.
Oh.
This is always the most fun part.
Nervous.
We always love this.
Okay.
That's actually a lie. These segments usually are. You never know, right? So, but I like this question. Do you write all the material on your MSNBC, The Rachel Maddow Show?
Yeah. I mean, I work with producers. Here's sort of how it goes. This is a little bit boring, so I'll say it fast. So I go to work, and most of my production staff is already at work by the time I'm there. They like work shifts, so they start earlier and work later, but it's not all the same people, you know what I mean? So I get in, I read for a couple of hours. There's already been a meeting before we talk in which the producers have guessed what they think I might want to talk about, and they write it on the whiteboard that's out in our cubicle farm. And so I read for a couple of hours, and then it's supposed to be 1:30, but it's always 2 o'clock. I run out to the cubicle farm and I say, right, here's what I want to do. And I erase everything they've got on the whiteboard. And I write down my list. And there's usually, it's usually about 50% overlap. And the list is, here's what the universe of news is today. And based on this universe of news, what can we make the best TV out of? And so we pick 6 segments. And each of those segments gets assigned to a segment producer, or 2 or 3, depending on what the segment is. And then we assign people to go find guests to talk to about those segments. This is not the way that other shows do this. Other people book people days in advance. That would be so awesome. I can never do that. We make a decision based on that, and then I go back into my office, and it's like the lights go off, and I become this cave person, and like I pull the blinds down, and it's all like very unpleasant, Maddow, don't talk to me, don't knock, not nice, friendly time. And I'm reading. I'm doing research, my own research for those segments. And then one at a time, as I'm doing that, the segment producer assigned to each segment is reporting, fact-checking, putting together tape, putting together elements, making sure that we've got the guests that we want to get, and spending a lot of time on the phone and in the archives, amassing what we've got to say about that. And then we work it out. Me and that producer work it out. Usually what happens is that I either type or dictate, and they write it down. Everybody uses recorders so that they can, it's just really embarrassing, so they can record what I'm saying, and they type it up. We match it with the material. They will give me a draft based on what I said, which I then edit. And it's nuts. It's a nuts process. These brilliant, smart, ambitious producers who would have like 30-year careers in any other business. I'm like chewing them up and spitting them out within 2 years. Like I'm really ruining people's lives. It's way too hard. And
congratulations on that, by the way.
It feels great. And then at 8:45 p.m. every night, like, oh my God, it's 8:45. What? And then I sprint to the makeup room, and the show's only 90% done, and then I'm banging out edits in the commercials for the F block. Oh my God. And then at 10 o'clock, is it over? Like, it's totally unsustainable. So yes, I write the show.
Is the air your calm place?
No.
No,
because even on the days when the show is 100% written and edited before we go on the show, A, there's always the possibility of breaking news. And B, I am unsettled that I re-edit stuff in the moment. So I'm constantly working and reworking the show right up until the last minute that the show is on. And
because you're too cool for school when you're on the air, man.
Really?
Yeah.
You can't see the frantic?
No.
My personal life is my calm place. And so I'm very protective of the time that I have with Susan and the time that I have in Western Mass. Like when I come home on the weekends, like I'm not doing my normal come home on the weekends thing while I'm doing this book tour. Maybe it'll make me crazy. Because being able to come home, being able to have a couple of days of peace with Susan and our friends, and to go fishing and to walk the dog and to dig in the dirt and do all that stuff, that's when I calm down. But I'm not calm between Monday at noon and Friday at midnight. There's no calm.
Let's end with this one, which I think is a good question about, it's a political question. Would you encourage progressives to work within say, the Working Families Party in order to increase pressure on Democratic candidates who run on that line, including President Obama, to give more weight to a progressive as opposed to a neoliberal agenda?
You know, that's a good question. There's no mirror image on the left and the right between, there isn't an equivalent to the conservative movement that sort of drags the Republican Party behind it on the right. On the left, there definitely are progressive movements of all different kinds, but they do not exert the kind of influence over democratic politics the way the conservative movement does. The Republican Party is sort of like a little dented, rusted, broken axle wagon that gets dragged behind this really impressive machine that is the conservative movement. And on the left, it's much more integrated. It's just sort of one more thing. And so I don't know if the left should try to emulate the right so that maybe the same kind of mirror effect could happen. I think that the way the right works has successfully dragged Republican politics further and further and further to the right in almost an increasingly fast way, so that anything triangulated between left and right keeps moving the center further in their direction. Should the progressive movement try to move democratic politics to the left? I think it would be interesting if it worked. I don't know if it would work, but the most direct way there is to primary candidates. The primary process. The right knows this, I think, as well as the left. But if you can conceivably win the general election having primaried the establishment candidate on the left, then you are going to move the politics of that constituency. You're going to move the politics of that part of the world to the left. You do have to be able to win the general election, though, because if all you succeed at is toppling the viable Democratic candidate, and so then the race goes to the Republican, well, congratulations, go bask in your purity. But if you can topple the establishment candidate and then win, then you've changed the world.
It has been such a thrill to have you on the show. It really has been an absolute delight.
Oh, thank you.
I can't tell you how much I enjoy your work.
Thank you. I am a long-time listener, first-time caller.
Well, thank you.
I've been a fan of yours for a very long time, and AMC is absolutely central to who I am. So.
Thank you very much. Rachel Maddow's new book is Drift, The Unmooring of American Military Power. It is published by Crown. We enjoy hearing from our listeners about the show. You can email us at book@wamc.org, and you can listen again to this or find past book shows at wamc.org. This has been a special off-the-shelf edition of the book show. Many thanks to the entire staff and crew of the Northshire Bookstore in Manchester, Vermont. Please go to www.northshire.com for more information. Kudos to the support team here at Manchester Elementary Middle School. A super thank you to our producer, Sarah LeDuc, who is here producing our program today. Bookmark us for next week, and thanks for listening for The Book Show. I'm Joe Donahue.
Yay!